Hey guys, tonight we're drifting into a land where the fields don't just grow rice, they breathe. You step into the morning mist of ancient Cambodia, and the air is thick with the smell of wet earth and something faintly metallic like bronze worn smooth by time. Birds chatter like they've had too much coffee, frogs grunt rhythmically from their puddle posts, and all around you the land exhales. Not metaphorically. The ground quite literally breathes. This is the Khmer Empire. Or to put it in slightly more relatable terms, the people who figured out how to flood and unflood thousands of acres on purpose before Europe even understood crop rotation. You're standing ankle-deep in one of history's most mind-bending water management feats engineered without modern tools, blueprints, or bubble levels. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. Not just because of the malaria crocodiles or rogue elephants, but because you definitely forget to open the right floodgate at dawn and ruin someone's entire planting season. No pressure. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Cambodia or Colorado, it's always rice o'clock somewhere. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You slosh forward across a causeway. It's not paved, just packed earth raised like the spine of a sleeping dragon bisecting a long canal. To your left, water lilies bloom with slow serenity. To your right, the jungle creeps, close vines dangling like lazy arms. Angkor, the Khmer capital, once hosted nearly 1 million people, an absurd number for a city without cars, phones, or corner coffee shops. But this wasn't just any city. This was a hydro-engineered marvel, where the very infrastructure breathed in sync with the monsoon. You hear the gentle glug-glug of water moving through unseen sluices. Somewhere beneath you, clay pipes, buried ditches, and hand-packed stone channels are shifting the water's path like quiet stagehands preparing the next act. The city's temples might get the Instagram likes today, but back then, it was all about the rice and the water that fed it. Ancient Khmer engineers worked with the seasons like they were co-workers, sometimes stubborn, sometimes generous. They didn't fight nature, they curated it. And that's your first historical fact for the night. The Khmer Empire didn't just live with the monsoon, they made it their co-pilot. Their entire calendar revolved around it. Rain came in two generous halves: the wet season, when water poured from the sky with dramatic flair, and the dry season where the sun played villain. The Khmer planned store the wet season and ration it with engineer-level precision. Which brings us to a fringe tidbit: they used mounds of snails as water level markers. Yes, piled snail shells, because nothing says trustworthy measuring system like a slowly disintegrating mollusk heap. And it worked. The shells indicated when water levels dropped below a certain line, prompting adjustments to flow. You begin to understand why the rice fields are said to breathe. Not in some metaphorical poetic way, but in a measurable, controlled inhale-exhale cycle. Angkor was designed not as a maze of buildings, but as an aquatic machine. The temples weren't the center, they were more like the decorative lid on an underground clockwork system of canals, dikes, reservoirs, and paddies. The idea was simple: hold enough water to keep crops alive through drought, but not so much that everything drowned. And keep it moving. Historians still argue whether these complex systems were centrally planned by kings or evolved slowly through local genius. Some say the divine monarchs dictated every dike and ditch. Others believe local farmers experimented over generations, tweaking canal angles by the moonlight. Either way, it all somehow worked until, of course, it didn't. But that's for later. For now, you move along a raised dike, the jungle pressing close, dragonflies hovering like tiny helicopters. You step carefully over slick moss, and notice how the embankment gently slopes, not random, not eroded, just designed that way. If the slope is wrong, the water stagnates. Too steep and the field drains too fast. You're walking on a 1,000-year-old math equation. And here's where it gets cheeky. Imagine modern city planners trying to build a suburb where every road doubles as a floodgate, and your driveway is also a rice field. The Khmer weren't just engineers, they were surrealists with a clipboard. Their logic defies ours, but it works in a place where rain falls sideways and the ground squelches when it's dry. A rooster crows in the distance. You pass a bundle of reeds tied with palm string, probably someone's homemade measuring stick. You smile. Somewhere a modern historian is still trying to decode it. For you, though, it's just another charming detail in the sleepy landscape of water and willpower. You stop to rest beneath a sugar palm, sipping something cool from a cracked coconut. It's the end of your first day here, and somehow you haven't sunk into the mud. That's a win. The air smells of jasmine and faintly of fish. You hear frogs again, and in the distance a low thump as a farmer adjusts a sluice gate. The land breathes. You breathe with it. You wake, or perhaps you never truly slept on a platform woven from bamboo nestled just above the paddies. The early mist coils upward like incense smoke, turning the landscape into a watercolor painting. Everything is hushed as though the empire itself is still rubbing its eyes. You rise with a slow stretch, your feet finding the woven floor with a creak. Below, water laps gently at the posts. Not enough to flood, just enough to remind you that this entire place floats in a balance so precise, it would make a Swiss watch nervous. Angkor wasn't hidden because it was small. Quite the opposite. At its peak, it sprawled across more than 1,000 square kilometers, bigger than modern-day Paris. But its most important structures weren't always built of stone. A surprising number of Khmer structures, including homes, granaries, and even certain administrative centers, were made of wood. Gone now, of course, chewed up by time, and tropical termites with unstoppable appetites. That's your first historical fact for tonight, what we see of Angkor today. Those grand temples, the bas-reliefs, the tiered towers, that was just the stone skeleton. The real city was organic, dynamic, and largely biodegradable. Imagine if your city was made mostly of driftwood and rice straw. Now imagine it worked. For centuries. You step off the platform and onto a worn dirt path. It's not muddy yet. Give it 2 hours. The earth is still firm under your soles, and the faint fragrance of lemongrass trails on the breeze. There's movement ahead. You catch a glimpse of a woman balancing 2 baskets on a pole across her shoulders. One holds what looks like rice seedlings. The other, a child fast asleep under a straw hat. That's efficiency. As you trudge forward, your path winds around a cluster of sugar palms. Their trunks are so textured, they look braided. The juice from these trees was once tapped and boiled into sweet syrup, then mixed with rice paste, and stored in earthen pots, sealed with banana leaves. Fringe fact. Those pots doubled as mosquito repellents when placed strategically around sleeping areas. Somehow they worked. Sort of. The Khmer didn't just build for humans, they planned for plants, animals, and the water itself. Their engineers understood how rainfall flowed down slopes, pooled in hollows, and evaporated under an angry sun. They used that knowledge to dig ponds where birds could rest, frogs could sing, and locals could bathe, sometimes all at once. Picture an ancient multi-purpose spa with occasional eels. At the heart of this watery city lay Angkor Wat, not just a temple but an astronomical calendar, a symbol of divine power, and an enormous spiritual flex. The temple's moat alone was more than 200 meters wide, engineered with such mathematical precision that modern hydrologists still scratch their heads. Did they use string star charts? Luck historians still argue whether this moat was primarily spiritual, practical, or both. You cross a narrow wooden bridge over one such canal, swaying ever so slightly with each step. To your left, a boy flicks water with his foot, laughing softly as minnows scatter. You pause and watch him, struck by the simplicity. The water isn't rushing, it meanders, curves, and whispers. Khmer waterways were never about brute force. They were about rhythm. The engineers designed canals to snake, not sprint. Why? Because sharp angles cause erosion, And erosion is the enemy of stability. These builders knew that. They made curves their allies, allowing silt to settle gently, letting reeds anchor the banks, and giving fish a place to hide from herons and hungry boys. You pass a shrine cradled beneath a Bodhi tree. Yellow cloth flutters in the wind. A small clay figurine worn smooth by 1,000 touches grins up at you from its perch. Maybe a fertility deity, maybe a spirit of rice, or maybe just a smile in the mud. The Khmer worldview didn't separate the sacred from the functional. The water was holy. The fields were shrines. Each irrigation channel could carry both rice water and prayer. You begin to sense that walking here isn't just a matter of geography. It's a kind of devotion. Quirky tidbit. Some priests are said to have blessed the canals by floating lotus flowers down them, reciting chants to encourage kind floods. No one's sure if it worked, but the locals swore the rice tasted sweeter that year. Placebo effect, divine intervention, or just excellent fertilizer. In the distance, a temple rises like a stone lotus, its tears catching the rising sun. A slow trickle of saffron-robed monks makes its way toward the water's edge. One carries a wooden ladle, another a basket of flowers. They pause at the canal, kneel, and release the petals one by one. You feel the calm of it settle into your shoulders. As you keep walking, something shifts beneath your foot. A flat stone half buried, marked with strange etchings. Perhaps a marker for a long-gone sluice gate. Or maybe just a board game lost to time. Either way, it reminds you that beneath this landscape of lilies and dragonflies lies another, a buried lattice of ideas and intentions forgotten, but not erased. The Khmer Empire may be gone, but its breath lingers. The sun climbs higher, casting shifting gold across the surface of the paddies, which now ripple like hammered copper. You're not just walking through a landscape. You're pacing through a living machine, quiet, pulsing, old enough to make your hometown look like a toddler in a suit. Rice, you learn, was the obsession. The national anthem of Angkor was not sung. It was sloshed, raked, bundled, and steamed. This wasn't some side dish. Rice was currency. Rice was diplomacy. Rice was life. You pause beside a low dike that threads its way like a seam across the flooded field. It doesn't look like much. Just a gentle mound of earth wide enough for one ox and one barefoot farmer. But this humble ridge is part of an ancient design, a matrix of levees and bunds that allowed the Khmer to control exactly how much water each plot received. Not too little. Not too much. Just enough to keep the rice grinning. Here's your historical fact. The Khmer perfected a form of seasonally inundated rice agriculture, in which paddies were flooded during certain stages of growth and drained during others, all coordinated across enormous territories. Think crop symphony, not solo. Timing was everything. A mistake didn't just ruin your field, it could wreck your neighbors too. Rice varieties were selected with terrifying specificity. Some needed more standing water. Others preferred mud so thick you could lose a sandal forever. Farmers didn't guess. They knew. And the water system had to match. There were highland paddies, lowland paddies, floating paddies. Even sneaky upland rice planted between monsoon clouds. And here's your fringe tidbit: rice fields weren't always planted in tidy rows. Some Khmer farmers laid their seedlings in swirling patterns, following the curves of topography and superstition alike. It wasn't just agriculture. It was landscape calligraphy. You crouch down, running your fingers through the water. A frog stares at you, unimpressed. Tiny green shoots poke up around you, waving faintly in the wind, like they're saying, "Hey, this is my office." A boy herds ducks into the water nearby. Dozens of them. They paddle forward with chaotic unity, quacking like office gossip. But they aren't pets. They're pest control. The ducks eat weeds and insects, fertilize as they go, and stir up the mud just enough to keep it fresh. No spreadsheets, no meetings. Just ducks doing duck things. You glance down and spot one of those submerged snail shell mounds you heard about. Some still argue whether they were ritual markers or practical tools. Historians can't agree, but you suspect it's both. After all, this is a civilization where praying and plumbing held hands. The deeper you go, the more you realize Khmer engineering wasn't just technical, it was agricultural choreography. Dikes were shaped to guide floodwater gently. Inlet gates, some carved from sandstone, could be opened or closed with palm leaf ropes. Even the angle of the paddy edges was designed to catch sediment during overflow. Nothing was accidental. Imagine your own backyard having a 3-tiered drainage plan and a fish hatchery baked into it. Khmer farmers weren't just feeding their families, they were tuning their fields like instruments. And speaking of tunes, you hear one. A gentle hum drifting on the wind. A lullaby maybe. Or just a chant. Someone is singing nearby, half singing, really just rhythmic syllables repeated like the slow pull of a loom. It weaves into the bird song and the croaking into the buzz of dragonflies and the breeze through palm leaves. You realize the rice paddies are speaking. Not literally, but through rhythm. The air here has cadence. And if you sit long enough, you start to sink. Here's something charming. There's evidence that Khmer farmers set out small offerings for the rice spirits before planting. A few grains of flour, maybe a sliver of banana. Tiny gestures toward unseen guests. Were they superstitious? Probably. But also deeply practical. Respect the land and the land might respect you back. You wipe your brow and sip from a gourd of cool water handed to you by a passing farmer. No words exchanged, just a nod. Hospitality here is as quiet as the wind. Rice wasn't just a crop. It was an economic engine. The food fed laborers, soldiers, monks. Surpluses were stored in granaries elevated on stilts. The largest temples built partly from tax rice. Laborers were often paid in rice. Want a new roof? It'll cost you 4 sacks. Want a statue carved? That'll be 6. Want to avoid getting conscripted into a public works project? Hope your rice harvest is generous enough to bribe your way out. You lean against the base of a sugar palm, breath slow. Somewhere water is being ladled from a ditch into a field with a rhythmic sloop. Sloop. It's not the sound of rushing civilization, it's the sound of slow mastery. That low old confidence of a people who knew how to listen to the land and speak back in irrigation. The fields are exhaling again. You feel it in your chest. And you're not sure anymore where the empire ends and the dreaming begins. The sky has reached that shade of blue where clouds begin to vanish, and the sun brushes everything with honeyed light. It's warm now, comfortably so, and your steps squish gently against the damp edge of a paddy. Each movement sends a shiver across the mirrored surface, disturbing tiny insects skating above it like nervous ballerinas. You've entered a region of raised canals. Unlike the soft wandering paddies from earlier, these are deliberate engineered arteries, straight and elevated like highways for water. But here's the twist, the Khmer didn't just move water. They commanded it. Your historical fact, Angkor's water management system wasn't passive. It actively redistributed water over vast distances, using gravity-fed canals, some stretching for miles and maintaining surprisingly consistent gradients. These weren't haphazard ditches, they were surveyed, dug, and maintained with a focus that would impress even modern civil engineers. You climb a modest rise and look down at a canal that runs perfectly straight, despite the jungle's best attempts to reclaim it. The banks are packed with earth and lined in places with laterite blocks, those rusty iron-rich stones that endure everything short of open rebellion. Each side slopes gently inward, not steep enough to collapse, not flat enough to hold standing water. Just right. The canal isn't just a trench, it's a memory of monsoons past and future. Every drop that runs through it has been accounted for, sometimes twice. Nearby, you spot a cluster of white herons perched like bureaucrats on the edge of a sluice gate. The gate itself is simple, 2 vertical grooves carved into stone, once holding a wooden plank that could be lifted or lowered to control water flow. Ingenious in its simplicity. Durable in its purpose. Still standing. Fringe tidbit for this leg of your journey. Some of these sluice gates had inscriptions, not instructions, but blessings. Little lines of Sanskrit or Old Khmer meant to protect the gate from collapse or sabotage, and maybe bring luck to the downstream fields. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of sticking googly eyes on your laptop. It won't fix anything, but it makes failure more personal. The sun now hits the water, just right, throwing a glittering net across the canal. You imagine what this would have looked like in its prime, lined with boats, farmers poling along with baskets of seedlings, the clink of tools against wood, the warm steam of midday lunch rising from reed roof huts. You pass an old man crouched on the bank cleaning something metallic. As you approach, you see it's a spade worn smooth from use, and tied with palm fibers where the handle cracked. He nods, says nothing, and returns to scraping it clean with a snail shell. Everything here is recycled. Even the silence. Angkor's engineers weren't just planning for a season, they were planning for centuries. Which makes this next point all the more impressive. They didn't just use canals to irrigate crops. They also controlled floods. During the monsoon, rainwater could drown fields in hours. To avoid that, the system allowed excess water to flow into artificial reservoirs, massive basins called barrages. These weren't just ponds. These were lakes. Human-made, rectangular, and precisely placed. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of barrages was spiritual, agricultural, or a royal vanity project. But functionally, they saved crops. They gave Angkor the power to flatten the curve of a chaotic climate. You wander now toward one such canal that bends a rare curve and discover why. Ahead, the land slopes downward, and the canal follows a terrace cut into the hill. This curve slows the water, prevents erosion. It's the gentle brake pedal of the ancient world. Even today, scholars puzzle over how the Khmer maintained such precise water levels. There's no sign of valves, no visible aqueducts, no grand dams, just earth, gravity, slope, and faith. Some suggest that bamboo weirs or floating plants were used to indicate when it was time to open or close a gate. Others argue that local intuition honed across generations was the real secret. You pass a young girl scooping water into a clay pot. She sets it on her head with practiced ease and walks off balanced like a metronome. In the modern world, we call this labor. Here it's life, a rhythm inherited. And then your favorite sensory moment yet. You stumble on a tree whose roots hug a carved stone face. A gentle smile half swallowed by moss. It's not part of a temple, just a stray fragment, probably from a long collapsed shrine or gate marker. The jungle took the stone but left the grin. You wonder who carved it. Did they laugh at their own work? Did they ever expect it would last 1,000 years only to become part of someone's rice field? A buffalo lowing breaks your thought. You turn startled to find one staring at you halfway submerged in the canal. It snorts, then blinks, then ignores you entirely. Its job is to fertilize the field and occasionally panic at frogs. Yours is to keep walking. You follow a low path beside the canal, and the sound of water deepens, not louder, just heavier. You sense it beneath you, moving not in a rush, but in quiet insistence. The water remembers where it has to go. You're just along for the ride. And that's the thing. This whole system feels less like something imposed on nature and more like something invited. The Khmer didn't dam rivers, they guided them. They didn't drain swamps, they shaped them. They weren't fighting the monsoon. They were dancing with it. And in the warm haze of late morning, as dragonflies skim the surface and the fields shimmer in neat rows, you feel the dance move through you too. You follow the canal until it empties gently into what looks like a moat, but not the kind you'd defend a castle with. No crocodiles, no spike pits, no flaming arrows waiting in the reeds. Just calm water still as polished glass reflecting the sculpted spires of Angkor Wat like some celestial photocopy. At first glance, it's easy to mistake this for pure vanity, a decorative feature to make the temple pop. But you know better now. You've walked the canals. You've seen the breathing fields. And so you begin to suspect this isn't just a moat. It's irrigation in disguise. Here's your historical fact. The vast moat around Angkor Wat, nearly 200 meters wide and 5 kilometers in perimeter, helped stabilize the temple's foundation by regulating groundwater. Without it, the ground would have swelled and shrunk with the seasons cracking the stone like a poorly stored clay pot. The moat wasn't just ornamental. It was an architectural insurance policy. You step closer to the edge. The water smells faintly of lotus and warm stone. A few turtles sun themselves on a slanted slab, ignoring you like royalty. Overhead, birds flit through the balustrades of a crumbling bridge. The symmetry is perfect. The air tastes still. The Khmer didn't just use water to grow food, they used it to hold up the heavens. Temples like Angkor Wat were designed to represent Mount Meru, the mythic center of the universe. And what surrounds Meru in Hindu cosmology? An ocean. A cosmic moat. So the water around the temple. It wasn't just practical, it was cosmic hydrology. Fringe tidbit time. There's a lesser-known theory that the moat also functioned as a celestial calendar. Some researchers believe its angles and dimensions align with the sun's movements across solstices and equinoxes. You're not expected to do the math, of course. You're just expected to marvel that someone else did, with zero calculators. You walk the perimeter now, your steps accompanied by the rhythmic squish of soaked soil beneath your feet. The sun glints off the water, and you spot what looks like a cluster of floating baskets. On closer inspection, they're fishing traps. Long woven cones staked in place by reeds. The design hasn't changed in centuries. A young boy checks them with practiced hands. He pulls one out, empties a single flopping fish into a clay pot, then resets the trap. He doesn't speak, just nods once and walks on the kind of nod that says, "This is how we do it. And this is how we've always done it." The moat wasn't the only temple surrounded by water. Across Angkor, dozens of temples were flanked by canals, moats, and reservoirs. And not one of them was accidental. Some scholars suggest these watery fringes served as spiritual boundaries, protecting sacred space from the chaos of the world. Others think they served agricultural purposes, catching rain runoff, preventing floods, or simply providing a handy source of mud for construction. Historians still argue whether the Khmer prioritized divine symbolism or hydrological practicality. You suspect the answer as usual is both. You wander into a shaded grove just off the temple grounds. Here, the jungle is reclaiming space. Vines crawl over laterite walls. Tree roots split flagstones like toothpicks. But even in the overgrowth, water remains. A narrow channel barely wider than your foot slips through the underbrush, still flowing. You crouch beside it. The current is lazy, but definite. Someone shaped this stream 1,000 years ago, and it still obeys. You scoop a handful and let it run through your fingers, feeling its warmth, its purpose. The Khmer didn't see water as an obstacle. They saw it as a partner. A force to be respected and invited, not crushed beneath stone. They engineered with the land, not against it. And that's the genius. That's the part modern cities still haven't quite figured out. Another call from the trees, a bird. No, a monk. Chanting perhaps, or just reciting a verse. His voice echoes faintly through the foliage, blending with the splash of distant footsteps. For a moment it's hard to tell if you're in the 12th century or the 21st. Then from behind you the soft plunk of a fruit falling into water. Mango maybe, or jackfruit. Sweet, heavy. You don't look back, you just keep walking. Your sandals now leave prints in the path. They'll dry in an hour. The water will remember. Everything here holds memory. The stones, the trees, the canals, even the fields, they all recall what they were built for. They haven't forgotten. You pass a carved Naga balustrade, its many heads grinning, its body undulating like a wave turned to stone. The serpent gods of the Khmer, protectors of water, spirits of the deep. Even their mythology flows. And still the land breathes. You feel it beneath your feet, a soft pulse through damp earth and warm air. The moat, the canal, the temple, they aren't separate pieces. They're one long exhale. You pause, close your eyes, and in the hush, you feel something impossible. The fields are still breathing. And now so are you. You're not entirely sure how long you've been walking, but the landscape has changed again. The vast canals and open paddies have slipped behind, and now you find yourself standing before something vast and still a beret. It looks like a lake. It feels like a lake. But it isn't a natural one. This is a reservoir built by human hands. The West Beret specifically stretches nearly 5 miles long and more than a mile wide. It's so large you can't see the far shore, especially in this early haze. The surface is glassy, reflecting clouds like a mirror that forgot it was made of water. Here's your historical fact. The Khmer built at least 4 major berets, colossal man-made reservoirs, that helped store and redistribute water throughout the empire. These weren't dug in a weekend. They required armies of workers, thousands of days of labor and engineering precision that baffles modern scholars. But here's where it gets wonderfully Khmer. They also built a temple in the center of this reservoir. Mebon Temple. On an island. Because apparently building a lake wasn't enough of a flex, they had to plop a religious monument right in the middle, like a cherry on top of a hydraulic sundae. You walk along the embankment wide enough to drive a cart along if you had one, which you don't. The slope is even covered in wild grass and small flowering plants. It's quiet. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels full, like everything is listening. Fringe tidbit. Archaeologists believe the soil dug out to form the beret was repurposed to construct temple platforms and dikes elsewhere in Angkor. Waste not, want not. Even a hole had a plan. The sun reflects off the surface in long trembling streaks, and you imagine what this place must have looked like at its peak. Barges drifting across the water. Monks chanting from the central temple. Farmers lining the banks drawing water bucket by bucket, their silhouettes blurred in the steam of the late morning. Berets weren't just utilitarian. They were symbolic. They represented the mythical sea of milk, the cosmic ocean in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology. The temple island, that's Mount Meru again. The Khmer didn't do things halfway. Every shovel of earth carried meaning. And here's where the scholarly debate gets splashy. Historians still argue whether these berets were used primarily for irrigation, spiritual symbolism, or political demonstration. Did they really supply water to the paddies? Or were they mostly ceremonial lakes to show off the king's divine authority? Evidence exists on both sides. Some say the alignment and layout scream religious significance. Others point to nearby channels and agricultural fields and say, nope. These were for rice. You sit on a flat stone and let your legs dangle over the edge of the embankment. The water is lower than it once was. You can tell by the ghost lines along the laterite blocks, a watermark of empires. A breeze moves across the surface. A heron glides overhead, wings stretched, casting a long shadow over the reeds. Somewhere nearby, a fish jumps. Plop. Ripple. Gone. And then you hear it, a faint clink, clink, clink behind you. You turn. A young girl barefoot is dragging a chain of small bronze bells on a stick, something between a toy and a noisemaker. She's followed by an older woman with a straw basket of offerings. They walk toward a tiny shrine tucked into the beret's embankment, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. They light a small stick of incense bow and sit. The girl sets her bells down and listens to the silence. It's a silence full of frogs' wind and memory. You stand again and continue along the Beret's edge, passing stone markers and old drainage slots. Each one reminds you this lake was designed. Not by chance, not by erosion, but by intent. The thought comes softly now like a breeze across lotus leaves. The Khmer didn't just build on the land, they built with it. The Berets filled when rains were generous. They emptied when the sun demanded. The system flexed and flowed, adjusting, adapting, breathing. And here's the wildest thing: modern scientists now believe the Berets helped regulate temperature across the city. That's right, Angkor may have had its own form of primitive climate control. Massive bodies of water absorb heat during the day and release it at night, buffering the sweltering jungle weather. Intentional or incidental, scholars debate that too. But either way, it worked. You imagine the empire on a particularly scorching day. Rice workers sweating under their conical hats, taking shade near the Beret's cool banks. Children swimming. Old women washing robes. The temple in the center glowing in the heat haze like a mirage with foundations. The water's level is still today. And so is your mind. You pause, take one last look across the vast mirrored surface, and feel something strange, like standing at the edge of time, watching it reflect you. The Khmer kings are long gone, their temples cracked, their names mostly forgotten, but the Beret still full. You peel yourself away from the stillness of the Beret, retracing your steps along the grassy slope, and follow a small trail that curves off to the east, narrow, shady, flanked by palms and low shrubs. The air is denser here, wetter, with that unmistakable scent of clay-rich earth recently stirred by rain. You feel it underfoot, soft, spongy, alive. This is the wet season's domain. A place that changes its shape and character twice a year without asking your permission. You're entering what scholars call the monsoon transition zone, where fields and forests trade roles seasonally like overworked actors. During the dry months, these lowlands are passable, dry, cracked, maybe even dusty. But now, they're a patchwork of shallow pools, mudbanks, reed beds, and half-drowned shrubs that stretch and shimmer like a watercolor painting that someone sneezed on. Tonight's historical fact: the Khmer engineered their entire ecosystem around the dual rhythms of the monsoon, wet and dry. They didn't just survive it, they scheduled their lives to it. There were planting calendars, flood timing protocols, and rituals keyed to the sound of the first raindrop on a banana leaf. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some Khmer villages use the frogs' croaking patterns to predict the coming of the rains. If the frogs sang after 3 days of windless silence, it was time to start preparing the seed beds. No weatherman, no barometer. Just frogs on a schedule. You trudge along the edge of a shallow flooded zone, where the water barely kisses your ankles, and the grasses bend sideways, like they're hiding from the sun. This land doesn't drain quickly. It drinks slowly, like a long meditative sip. Every root, every blade of grass is used to drowning a little. It's part of the routine. The idea of a flood here isn't panic-inducing. It's just Monday. That's the thing. The fields didn't get flooded, they asked to be. The ancient Khmer didn't wall off the water. They invited it in, gave it a seat, and made sure it left at the right time. The rhythm is everything. This area, you're told by a passing farmer in a faded sarong, was once part of a stepped canal system. You squint, and sure enough, the land undulates, slightly tiered terraces almost invisible beneath the grass and shallow standing water. The steps were angled precisely to allow gravity to move water from one level to another, like a very sleepy escalator made of dirt. Historians still argue whether these steps were engineered all at once, or whether they evolved over generations as local farmers tweaked the contours to match each year's rainfall. Some theories suggest imperial oversight. Others lean into grassroots brilliance. Either way, it's another piece of a puzzle whose manual has long since disintegrated. A dragonfly hovers near your nose, then zips off, offended perhaps by your lack of floral scent. You shuffle through a deeper pocket of water, disturbing a cloud of silt that swirls like smoke in the sunbeams. Off to your left, a young man bends at the waist, planting rice seedlings in neat little rows. He moves with a hypnotic rhythm. Step, press, drop. Step, press, drop. His hat shields his face, but you can see he's humming. A melody with no words. Maybe it's just for the plants. You watch for a moment. The rice seedlings bob in the breeze like concert-goers at an invisible festival. The paddies are only half full now, just enough to cushion the roots. Later, once the seedlings are stronger, more water will be let in. And later still, the field will be drained. It's a breath cycle. Inhale, hold, exhale, repeat. The fields breathe. That's not poetry. That's design. You crouch near a section where two paddies meet, divided by a thin strip of raised earth no wider than a log. It's damp and springy, and at the very base, nestled like treasure, you spot a trickle of water emerging from a narrow opening, an outlet channel feeding the next paddy down. The whole system is based on gentle gradients. No pumps, no motors, just gravity and patience. Fringe fact: some ancient Khmer farmers use dyed coconut husks, yes, dyed, to visually track the movement of water through their canals. A sort of water tagging system. It's unclear how effective it was, but imagine the joy of seeing a red coconut bob its way down a successful irrigation route. That's hydraulic celebration. You continue walking, the heat rising, now making the air shimmer. The frogs are louder. So are the cicadas. The humidity wraps around you like a damp blanket that refuses to let go. Ahead, a small shrine sits on a wooden platform. Not grand, just a shelf with a little figurine, a flower garland, and a cracked ceramic bowl half filled with rice grains and water. It's for the field spirit, you're told, or maybe for the ancestors. It doesn't matter. They're the same thing out here. And in the distance, as you reach the end of this soft humming path, you see what looks like a line of monks walking in single file across a dike. They're barefoot, their robes a river of saffron, and they move as if they've done this every day for 100 years. Maybe they have. You stop, breathe, listen. The rain hasn't come yet, but the frogs are singing. You linger for a moment at the edge of the terrace, watching the monks disappear into the haze like soft-colored flames drifting through the landscape. As their chants fade, you start to notice something else, a deep stillness, but not the same as silence. It's the sound of the land holding its breath. You've reached the part of Angkor's design where the system becomes subtle, nearly invisible. The rice fields here are neither flooded nor dry. They sit in a state of damp anticipation, a phase Khmer farmers understood intimately, the in-between. This is when the fields are most alive. Not when they're full, not when they're empty, but when they're breathing. Tonight's historical fact: Khmer rice paddies were built with breath in mind, designed to support oxygen exchange in the soil. In the waterlogged conditions typical of Southeast Asia, roots can suffocate if fields remain flooded too long. Ancient engineers learned to alternate wet and dry cycles, allowing oxygen to seep into the soil, encouraging healthy root growth and reducing pests and rot. Think of it as ventilating the lungs of the land. You walk between two fields, the narrow ridge soft and warm beneath your feet. Your toes squelch into the top layer, but below the soil holds firm. It's balanced, moist but not soggy. You kneel down, scoop a handful and crumble it in your palm. It holds its shape for a moment before slipping through your fingers like cooled oatmeal. Perfect. A few steps ahead, a man tends to his seedlings with a kind of reverent focus, pressing each one gently into place. He doesn't look up as you pass. His breathing is steady like the land's. And here's your fringe tidbit: some Khmer farmers are said to have whispered to their seedlings during planting, offering small blessings or family names. Not because they thought the plants could understand, but because it felt proper. You're giving something to the land. Might as well introduce yourself. The paddies here have subtle dips and mounds not visible until you really stare. These microtopographies helped manage standing water across a single field. By slightly raising certain rows, farmers gave plants a break from soaking, while lower rows retained the needed moisture. No survey tools, no topographic software, just a feeling in the soles of their feet, and maybe a bamboo stick. You pause at one of these slight rises standing just above the mirror-smooth surface. Dragonflies zip low over the water. A small bird, maybe a kingfisher, flashes by in a streak of blue and lands on a post half submerged in the mud. The whole field is still but alert, waiting. This is the inhale. In a few days, the sluice gate at the far end will be opened. Water will pour in gently, just enough to cover the base of the stalks, and then the paddies will exhale, draining in measured waves, drawing nutrients through the soil like breath through lungs. Historians still argue whether this breath-based rhythm was observed deliberately or learned over generations by trial and error. Some scholars credit royal engineers. Others lean toward grassroots innovation. Perhaps it was both top-down knowledge filtered through muddy sandals and local intuition. You keep walking and the landscape shifts again. Now there are earthen banks between fields carved with what look like claw marks. On closer inspection, they're drainage furrows, tiny trenches that allow excess water to flow out naturally. They aren't pretty, but they work. Fringe detail archaeologists have found evidence that some Khmer farmers trained fish to help maintain these furrows. Certain species like climbing perch naturally burrow and stir mud. Their movement helped keep channels open. Intentional aquaculture, perhaps, or a lucky side effect of fish doing fish things. Ahead, a raised wooden platform sits beside a large stone basin. A woman ladles water from the basin into clay jars and carries them into a thatched storage hut. You nod, and she gestures toward the basin. You peer in. It's filled with water so clear it seems invisible, save for the fine sediment swirling lazily at the bottom. The basin's sides are carved just faintly with spirals and flower motifs. Decorative, yes, but also practical. The spirals encourage water to circulate gently, preventing stagnation. You smile. Even the water containers here know how to breathe. Back outside, you walk along another paddy ridge and feel the wind pick up slightly. Not a breeze exactly, more of a stirring. The rice stalks respond in waves like green fur rippling across the landscape. The sound is faint, but present, 1,000 leaves rustling in harmony. You close your eyes and feel it, the breath of the land. Inhale the scent of wet earth, lotus pollen, frog-slicked stone. Exhale warm air, dragonfly wings, a distant splash. The Khmer didn't call it aerobic soil respiration. They didn't use the phrase oxygen diffusion rate. But they knew what their fields needed. A break. A pulse. A moment to catch their breath. You move slowly now, lulled by the rhythm of it. The rows of rice, the gentle curves of the canal, the soft slosh of water trickling from one terrace to the next. There's no rush here. Time folds. The air hums. This is the space between breaths. And it's exactly where you belong. By now your feet have dried and re-wet themselves several times over, and your pace has slowed into a rhythm that isn't walking so much as drifting. The sun has softened, filtered through light cloud cover, and the whole landscape is glowing in pale gold. A good time to solve a mystery, or at least walk straight into one. You round a bend in the path and find yourself gazing at a grid of canals that step gently downward, tier after tier, like a sunken staircase. It's quiet, and everything here feels intentional. This isn't erosion. This isn't runoff. This is a design. And here's your historical fact. Khmer engineers created stepped canal system series of descending terraces, linked by sloped channels and sluice gates to control the gradual release of water across large areas. These systems allowed them to irrigate multiple fields in sequence, maximizing yield, without overwhelming any single paddy. It's vertical irrigation without any pumps, just brains buckets and a lot of patience. You walk beside the top tier. It's dry at the moment, but you can see the outline of former flow. The stones are rounded, smoothed by centuries of trickling. You crouch to trace your fingers along one, and the groove beneath your touch confirms it. Water used to dance through here, guided carefully by an unseen hand. And here comes your fringe tidbit. Some of these steps were seeded with special grasses, clay-binding plants that prevented erosion during the heavier wet season. They weren't just holding soil, they were part of the machine, living cogs. Khmer engineers didn't just build with stone, they built with roots. You descend carefully to the next level. Each step is low, manageable, like it was made for unhurried people in loose robes carrying baskets of rice on their heads. It probably was. The canal banks are lined with laterite blocks, each one etched with tool marks that shimmer faintly in the dappled light. And tucked into the corner of one tier, half hidden beneath ferns, you spot what might be the remains of a sluice gate. A rectangular opening framed in stone with faint notches worn into the sides, where wooden planks might have been slid in or out. Primitive water control, but effective. You stand and imagine the operation. A farmer walks the tiers at sunrise, removing a plank from the first gate. Water floods the top paddy, filling slowly. Later, he replaces that plank and opens the next. The water flows downward, obeying gravity and schedule, feeding the earth in turns like a practiced cook, adding broth to a slow simmering stew. You pause, then smile, because even now, modern engineers scratch their heads at the scale and coordination needed for this. There's no written manual, no blueprint. Yet the system worked. Some even think it worked better than the concrete-heavy schemes built centuries later. Historians still argue whether these tiered systems were managed by individual farmers, village collectives, or government agents sent from Angkor's royal administration. Some inscriptions suggest localized control. Others mention canal wardens and water officials' roles that may have blended bureaucrat with priest. It's still unclear who had the final say when the water gates opened. And there's another mystery. While some of these canals run in straight lines, others are curved or angled slightly, sometimes inexplicably so. You follow one such bend, the path winding like a lazy question mark, and find it opens into a wide catchment basin. Was the curve a design for sediment control? A way to slow erosion? Or did it follow an older topographic feature, a now vanished streambed or sacred boundary? Nobody knows for sure. The jungle has eaten the context, and we're left with clues and suppositions. Fringe theory alert. One historian proposed that certain curves in these canals aligned with lunar cycles or ritual procession paths, effectively blending hydraulic function with cosmological symbolism. Did Khmer water engineers consult astrologers? Maybe. Would it surprise you at this point? Not even a little. As you walk farther along the stepped canal, you spot small stone platforms, every so often square, raised slightly above the path. Were they workstations? Rest stops? Places for offerings or shrines? No one agrees. But if you sit on one now as you do and close your eyes, you can almost hear it, the whisper of water flowing downhill, the squelch of wet sandals, the creak of bamboo poles balanced across tired shoulders. You open your eyes again. The sun is lower, the air heavier with moisture, and the frogs have resumed their raspy percussion. A mosquito dances near your ear, but decides you're not worth the effort. Good. You follow the canal all the way to its final tier, where it empties softly, precisely into a waiting pond. It's no bigger than a swimming pool, ringed with weeds and a few blooming lotuses. This is the settling basin, where runoff water gathers and sediment is allowed to drop. The water that leaves here, if it's used again, is clean enough to nourish without clogging. The Khmer thought through every drop, every flow, every breath. You sit beside the pond for a while, watching dragonflies zigzag across the surface like caffeine-fueled fairies. The pond is still, but it's not stagnant. There's a pulse in the way it catches the breeze, a whisper in how it curves toward the shadows. You can almost feel the fields beyond waiting their turn. Everything in motion. Everything in rhythm. The puzzle of the stepped canals may never be fully solved. But here in the humid hush of twilight, you understand what matters most. The fields didn't need perfection. They just needed balance. You step away from the settling pond, just as a warm breeze brushes past, rattling the reeds and lifting your hair ever so slightly. The light is slanting now, syrup thick and golden, and the shadows stretch long across the paddies like sleepy cats curling into evening. You find yourself walking along the crest of a wide dike, its earthen spine rising above the fields like a purposeful scar. It's not much to look at, just a raised path of packed mud dotted with crab holes and the occasional tuft of stubborn grass. But this too is no accident. Here's your historical fact. Khmer dikes were essential to the empire's agricultural mastery. Built to contain, redirect, and gently elevate water across their fields, these dikes were part infrastructure, part boundary marker, and oddly enough, part religious artifact. In many areas they were ritually blessed, maintained by local villagers with both tools and prayers. The width of the dike you're walking on suggests it was once an important one, maybe even a main route for transporting rice harvests by ox cart or human shoulders. The sides slope gently, not sharp or dramatic, so that water could rest against them without breaking them down. Thousands of feet have passed this way, and yours are just the latest. You stop at a dip in the dike where two fields meet, and the path fans outward slightly, an intersection of sorts. A weathered post rises from the center, the remnants of what might have once been a boundary marker or a community shrine. Tied to it is a single fraying strip of red cloth faded to the color of dried hibiscus petals. Fringe tidbit. In some regions of the Khmer Empire, dikes were believed to have guardian spirits, and farmers would offer incense or rice cakes at specific posts to ask for balance and safety. Not too dry, not too wet. Just right. Which, let's be honest, is more than you ask from your local weather app. You pass a sleeping dog curled in the shade of a sugar palm, twitching occasionally, as if dreaming of buffaloes or leftover fish. Beside it, a boy carefully stacks dried rice husks into a small mound. It's fuel most likely destined for the family stove. But here's a clever bonus: when lit in certain arrangements, those husk fires create just enough smoke to chase away mosquitoes. One flame, two problems solved. As you continue down the dike, the elevation gives you a sweeping view of the surrounding paddies. Some are flooded and shimmering, others drained and brown, some half and half like checkerboards made by sleepy gods. From up here, the pattern is mesmerizing, an organic mosaic of purpose. And here's where the dike becomes divine. In Khmer cosmology, the land wasn't just useful, it was sacred. Every boundary, every elevation, every shift in water level could carry spiritual weight. Dikes weren't just muddy ridges. In many areas, they were believed to represent the body of the Naga, the serpent spirit of water and earth. Some were even shaped in gentle curves, echoing the undulating body of that divine creature. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were central to Khmer hydraulic planning, or simply cultural overlays added after the fact. Some suggest engineers prioritized function while monks gave it form. Others propose a more integrated worldview where priests and planners worked hand in hand, calculating gradients and performing blessings in the same afternoon. As you descend the dike into a shaded grove, you spot a small shrine nestled into the base of the embankment. Just a few stones, a carved lotus, and a faded figure of what might once have been Vishnu or Lokasvara. There's incense ash scattered at its feet, and a single unopened lotus bud rests nearby. You sit for a moment on the low stone ledge, stretching your legs and watching the ants do whatever it is ants do with such urgent purpose. Around you, the jungle murmurs quietly, leaves. Rustle birds call, frogs test their vocal range like singers warming up for a concert. Then movement. A farmer approaches with a yoke across his shoulders, two baskets swinging rhythmically at either end. He walks along the dike like it's part of him, barefoot, sure-footed, as if he knows every route, every bump, every slick patch by memory. He passes without a word, just a nod, and continues on his way. You rise and follow his path. Eventually, the dike slopes downward again, blending back into the muddy earth. The air thickens with the scent of waterlogged grass and something slightly sweet, maybe ripening jackfruit or wet banana leaves in the sun. Another fringe fact for the road: some Khmer dikes were used as seasonal markers. During certain lunar festivals or harvest transitions, they were decorated with palm fronds, flower garlands, or even glowing oil lamps. Not just lines in the landscape, but living parts of the calendar. You reach a fork in the path. One way leads toward a field being drained, the other toward one being filled. You stand at the crossroads of breath, exhale to the left, inhale to the right, and suddenly it all makes sense. The dikes aren't barriers, they're lungs. They divide, yes, but they also connect. They guide the breath of the land. Gently, precisely, forever. The sun slips lower. The frogs begin again. You walk along the edge, tracing the path between one breath and the next. You follow the edge of the paddy, where the water is ankle-deep and warm as bathwater left out in the sun. Dragonflies skim the surface, their wings shimmering like stained glass. And somewhere in the distance you hear the long, lazy groan of a water buffalo. You slow your pace not because you're tired, but because the world around you has changed tempo, and it would be rude not to match it. Ahead, grazing lazily and half submerged in the thick mud, is the very creature you heard. A massive water buffalo, dark gray, with arched horns, chewing contentedly on something that looks both slimy and nutritious. Its ears twitch at the flies, and it gives you a casual side-eye, unimpressed by your shoes and your general lack of mud. Tonight's historical fact: water buffalo were the Khmer Empire's unsung engineers, used for plowing, tilling, trampling, and most importantly, puddling the fields. These massive beasts helped prepare the soil by stomping it into the perfect sticky consistency before planting. Their wide hooves were ideal for creating evenly compacted surfaces while gently mixing water and earth into a thick, gooey base layer for rice. You edge closer to the buffalo, who snorts but does not budge. A boy nearby, probably the animal's handler, watches with amusement as you give the beast a wide berth. He's maybe 9 years old, holding a palm rope in one hand and a small flute in the other. He plays a few quiet notes, and the buffalo turns its head toward him with what might actually be affection. Fringe tidbit. Some Khmer children trained their buffalo with tunes, simple sequences played on handmade flutes. A particular melody meant stop, another meant follow, and if the buffalo ignored both, well, then the rope came out. But music came first. You walk beside them now, the boy guiding the animal back toward a shallower pool. The path is soft but firm, your feet sinking slightly with each step, making a satisfying squish. In the air, the smell of wet grass and warm manure mix into something oddly comforting, like a barn built inside a greenhouse. The buffalo stops suddenly and lowers itself into the water with an audible sploosh, submerging up to its belly and letting out a deep sigh that seems to vibrate through the very earth. You chuckle. Even the animals understand how to exhale out here. You keep walking, and soon the field around you fills with activity. Women in conical hats are planting rows of seedlings, bending at the waist back and forth in a slow, synchronized motion that's less like labor and more like dance. The green of the rice is neon against the muddy water, startling in its brightness, as if nature couldn't help showing off. Each woman works with grace, speed, and a rhythm so practiced it feels inherited. Their laughter is soft, their chatter low and even. They speak while planting, gossiping, you imagine, or maybe reciting the latest temple stories, because even a rice field deserves narrative. You join the edge of one row just to watch. One woman glances up and nods toward a small wooden platform nearby. A resting place. You take the hint. The platform is raised slightly on 4 posts, woven from bamboo and shaded by a broad palm leaf roof. You sit careful not to disturb a pot of sticky rice and dried fish someone's left cooling in the shade. The smell makes your stomach rumble. You won't steal it. But you do think about it. From here, you have a perfect view of the entire system in motion. Buffalo churning. Farmers planting. Water moving at the speed of thought. It's not a frenzy. It's a flow. The field breathes in, and the people breathe with it. And here's something delightful: the mud they're standing in isn't random. Khmer farmers would often condition their paddy soil with crushed snail shells, fish bones, and even bits of ash to improve the mineral content. Some villages even had specific recipes for their mud passed down through families. Not just dirt, but curated dirt. Historians still debate whether these practices were systematic or situational. Did everyone do it, or just certain communities with access to specific materials? The evidence is scattered: an urn here, a note in a Chinese traveler's journal there. But the impression is clear. Khmer rice fields weren't accidental. They were carefully maintained ecosystems. Half farm, half formula. A few children run through the shallows now, laughing as they chase a frog too clever for capture. Their feet leave temporary whirlpools. Their joy is muddy and loud. The adults don't scold them. Here, even play has a place in the system. You rise from the platform and resume walking, the sun now lower in the sky, painting the fields in molten light. The air has shifted. It's not cooler yet, but it will be soon. The frogs have begun again. So have the crickets. The field hums. Ahead you spot another buffalo. This one is older, with a decorative harness and faded red pigment across its forehead, maybe from a recent festival. It turns its massive head to look at you, blinks once and then resumes chewing. You nod at it as you would an old friend. It does not nod back. But it doesn't leave either. And in that muddy stillness, something sacred settles. The beasts that built this place may not speak, but they remember. And now so do you. You follow the curve of a dike past the lounging buffalo, and just as the sun hits the horizon with that buttery late-day glow, the scene changes again, gently but unmistakably. The rice fields flatten out, the chatter of workers fades, and in the distance you hear a low rhythmic chime. Not bells exactly, but something softer, more ceremonial. You're approaching a gathering place. You round a bend and find yourself on the outskirts of a small wooden structure. Its thatched roof bowed from years of rain, its stilts resting in calm, reflective water. On a narrow platform, several people sit cross-legged in reverent silence. A flickering lamp glows beside a small clay altar, piled with jasmine blossoms, lotus buds, and handfuls of uncooked rice. This isn't just rest. It's ritual. Here's your historical fact. In the Khmer world, rice wasn't just a crop. It was a deity's gift. Entire ceremonies revolved around the planting, growth, and harvesting of rice. Offerings were made to ensure strong rains, healthy seedlings, and pest-free seasons. Monks blessed fields before plowing began, and harvest festivals blended the sacred with the seasonal, like incense in the morning wind. You kneel quietly at the edge of the gathering, unnoticed or simply accepted. A woman chants softly in Old Khmer, her words drifting like water itself, steady, murmuring, endless. Others repeat in a whisper, their palms pressed together. The scent of burning lemongrass hangs in the air, sweet and faintly medicinal. And here's your fringe tidbit. Certain Khmer ceremonies involved placing rice dolls, tiny figures made from stalks and husks, at the corners of fields, to protect the crop from jealous spirits. These dolls were sometimes dressed in miniature skirts or sarongs, then ceremonially buried at the end of harvest. A quiet goodbye, a thank you, a wish for next year. You take it all in: the lamp flicker, the scent of rice smoke, the rhythmic drone of prayers. Everything here hums with that strange sacred balance part, science part, magic all woven into the breath of the land. When the chant ends, the group disperses slowly. No rush. Some light small candles and float them in the canal. Others return to the fields or walk back along the dikes. One man offers you a smile and hands you a string-tied bundle of sticky rice wrapped in banana leaf. It's warm. You nod gratefully. You don't speak the language. You don't need to. You eat as you walk, and as the light fades, the world around you changes colors again. The patties reflect the pink sky now. Trees become silhouettes. The frogs and crickets gain confidence, their chorus rising in waves. This is when the spirits come out, they say. Not to haunt, but to listen. You arrive next at a small temple nestled between two fields, no bigger than a farmhouse, but built entirely of stone. Its lintels are carved with curling vines, mythical birds, and scenes of harvest. A bas-relief shows a woman offering rice to a god who looks suspiciously like he's smiling through a mouthful of it. Inside, a monk in saffron robes tends a small oil lamp, its flame steady despite the wind. He looks up and beckons gently, not for you to enter, but simply to witness. You remove your sandals and stand at the threshold. Inside the temple, the air is cool. The walls are stained with centuries of soot and smoke, but the carvings are sharp. A mural of the rice cycle stretches along the wall like a timeline, planting, growing, harvesting, offering. No emperors, no wars, just rice. And here comes your next quirky detail. Some temples stored sacred rice seeds. Grains saved from the first harvest of each season, blessed and set aside to plant the following year. They weren't just seeds. They were promises. Historians still argue whether these temples doubled as storage sites or served primarily religious functions. Were the seeds practical insurance or spiritual anchors? The answer predictably is yes. You sit by the doorway for a moment, watching the monk extinguish the lamp and sweep the floor with a bundle of straw. The sky outside has turned indigo. A single star appears over the treetops. You head back toward the fields where fireflies have begun their quiet work, tiny green flares blinking lazily in the reeds. The water reflects them, making the whole paddy flicker like a mirror full of floating candles. This is where you realize, for the Khmer, growing rice wasn't an act of survival. It was an offering. Each stalk planted, each seed stored, each breath of water released was part of something sacred. The fields didn't just grow food. They grew faith. You walk slowly now, not from weariness, but because it feels like rushing would break some unspoken pact. The night air has settled over the land, like a silk blanket, cool, but not cold. The frogs have gone from background singers to full lead vocalists, and the fireflies blink like lazy punctuation across the horizon. Ahead, a stone causeway juts out over a wide pond. It's worn smooth by time, and footsteps, its laterite blocks patched here and there with moss, and the careful repairs of anonymous hands. At the far end, torches flicker near the base of a tower. Not a temple, not quite. More like a watch station. But not for people. Tonight's historical fact. Some Khmer kings, especially in the later Angkorian period, were known as hydraulic monarchs, rulers, who claimed divine authority in part through their control of water. These were not just warrior kings or temple builders. They were engineers with a god complex, and they made it work. Their political legitimacy was tied directly to their ability to tame the monsoon and coax rice from floodplains. One such ruler, Jayavarman VII, commissioned massive expansions of the canal networks, roads, and hospitals across the empire. Some inscriptions suggest he visited public works sites personally. Imagine that your divine overlord showing up in sandals, squinting at a ditch and telling you the gradient's off. And here's your fringe tidbit. There's evidence that certain canals were built in sacred alignment with temple towers, so that water flowing into fields first passed by a shrine or sanctuary. A symbolic blessing. A silent filtration of intention. Engineers and priests working in tandem to make the rice grow and the cosmos stay put. You cross the causeway and reach the tower. No door, just a broad opening where a torch is lodged into a stone groove. A man stands beside it bare-chested and barefoot with a weathered cloth slung over one shoulder. He nods to you and points down a narrow staircase descends into darkness. You hesitate. Then follow. The steps are stone damp with age, but even and solid. At the bottom you reach a square chamber open to the night sky. Stars hang above like rice grains tossed across a black lacquer bowl. In the center of the chamber, a sluice gate ancient and intact. You're not the first to stand here. You won't be the last. This is where the real decisions were made. When to release water and how much. When to hold it. When to trust the clouds. Or not. You crouch by the gate. The wood is long gone, but the grooves remain precise parallel still straight after all these years. Someone carved these by hand. Someone knew the angles, the measurements, the weight of water before it even arrived. It's said that canal keepers or Neek Poik Tuk held positions of immense local authority. They didn't wear crowns or carry swords, but they decided when water flowed. And that meant when rice grew, when people ate, when temples were paid. Quiet power. The kind that shaped the calendar more than any king. Some Khmer villages passed down the role of waterkeeper through families. Others elected the role based on a mixture of merit, seniority, and maybe who had the driest sandals at the last flood. Rituals were held when sluices were opened, offerings of coconuts, betel leaves, sometimes even blood from a pricked finger. Just enough to remind the spirits they were invited. You sit on the edge of the chamber and imagine the water rising. Not rushing, just arriving. Like a decision finally made. Historians still argue whether these gate structures were monitored daily or adjusted only seasonally. Some say farmers submitted formal requests like tiny bureaucratic weather reports upstream to the gatekeepers. Others believe it was all based on visual cues tradition and the kind of intuition that comes from decades of listening to frogs. You ascend back into the open air and find the man still standing beside the torch. He offers you a cup of tea, cool, earthy, slightly sweet. You nod in thanks and sip. It tastes like the land, a little muddy, a little herbal, a little perfect. You move on through the dark, guided now by moonlight alone. The dikes gleam like silver roads, and the fields stretch out endlessly, half sky, half reflection. And that's when you notice something else. The canals are glowing. Not brightly, but faintly pale green lines of bioluminescent algae streaking along the edges, catching moonlight and reflecting fireflies. The whole system is alive, even in darkness. Especially in darkness. A family sits nearby around a lantern, their meal spread on banana leaves. Rice, salted fish, some pickled greens. Laughter ripples from their circle like another kind of irrigation soaking everything it touches. You wave. They wave back. The man at the sluice gate. He's walking home now, his torch flickering behind him. He doesn't hurry. Why would he? The water will wait. The stars will rise. The fields will breathe. And tomorrow, the work begins again. The moon has climbed higher now, casting its pearly sheen across the rice paddies, turning water into silver and trees into cutouts. You walk under this dreamlight canopy, and as you go, a new sound emerges, a rhythmic slap, 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 like wet laundry or gentle drumming. You follow it until you find its source. Two women's sleeves rolled high and feet bare stand in the shallows, beating long-handled paddles against the water in a hypnotic rhythm. It isn't washing. It's not punishment. It's something else entirely. Tonight's historical fact. Throughout the Khmer countryside, families employed a variety of manual techniques to keep pests from settling in their flooded fields. Among them, noise-making. The rhythmic pounding of water served not just as a ritual gesture, but also as a kind of acoustic scarecrow disturbing mosquito larvae flushing snails, and discouraging certain egg-laying insects from getting too cozy. You crouch nearby, careful not to interrupt. One woman hums as she works. The other pauses occasionally to splash water up onto the dike where drying bundles of rice seedlings lie in tidy piles. It's not hard work, but it's exacting. Just enough splash, just enough rhythm. No more, no less. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some families crafted frog drums, bamboo tubes submerged in the paddies that would echo with each splash, mimicking the croak of territorial frogs. The idea fooled predators into thinking the field was already claimed. A kind of rural sonic warfare frog style. You watch until they finish and then trail them along a quiet path toward a small cluster of stilt houses. These homes are modest, but sturdy, raised well above the floodline, each one connected to the others by a plank walkway. Between the houses, narrow wooden sluices extend into the paddies, guiding runoff gently downhill like sleepy slides. A man crouches near one of these sluices, poking at it with a bamboo rod. You watch as he inserts a handful of fibrous weeds, perhaps to slow the flow, perhaps to strain out debris. The water glides past his bare feet like silk. This is the work that no one notices in the big stories. No kings, no architects, no declarations carved in stone. Just 1,000 quiet moments of tuning, adjusting, fiddling. The background maintenance that made the foreground possible. You pass a hut with a lantern glowing inside. Children sleep side by side on woven mats, their arms flung in the chaotic freedom of dreams. Outside, a pair of frogs have claimed a dish left out for rinsing rice. They croak once, deep low satisfied, and fall silent again. Not far away, a reed fence encircles a small patch of dry land. Within it, a shrine just a foot high tucked beneath a Bodhi tree. A rice doll leans against the trunk, weathered from sun and rain. You lean in and notice faint traces of pigment, red across the brow, white across the belly. This, you realize, is one of those harvest guardians, placed after the planting season to watch over the fields. Sometimes removed, sometimes not. This one has been here a while. You sit beside it on a rock, looking out over the paddies. The reflection of the moon is unbroken, save for the occasional ripple from a fish or the soft dunk of a falling fruit. And suddenly it hits you, everything is participating in the system. The frogs, the fish, the trees, the humans, the mud. The Khmer didn't try to isolate nature, they invited it. They didn't dominate water, they listened to it. The goal wasn't control. It was coordination. Historians still argue whether this ecological choreography was part of a formal philosophy or just an instinct passed through generations. Was there a textbook, or was the land itself the teacher? Probably both. The water remembers more than we do. A mosquito tries your arm, but you wave it off and it takes the hint. The wind shifts. Somewhere a drum thumps, once low and distant, likely a night ceremony at a nearby temple. You don't know what it's for. You don't need to. You're part of the audience whether you understand the script or not. Another breeze slides across the paddies and you notice movement in the far distance, a man carrying 2 torches across a narrow causeway. The flames bob, then slow, then extinguish one by one. He's closing the gates for the night. The canals will rest. The fields will settle. The breath of the land softens in the dark. And you sit a moment longer next to a straw guardian, listening to the frogs under the forgiving glow of a moon that has seen every harvest and every flood, and still hangs around to watch the next one. Morning returns like a shy guest, softly at first, barely nudging the horizon, then spilling slowly across the paddies in hues of warm amber and milky gray. A rooster crows somewhere behind you, full of enthusiasm, and just slightly off key, as if it's trying to remember how mornings work. You rise and stretch your joints, creaking in harmony with the frog's final notes. The fireflies have vanished. The dew sparkles on every blade of rice like a constellation trapped in the earth. The fields are breathing again. You can feel it in the cool air that hugs your skin, in the way the mist lifts gently from the water's surface, like an exhale made visible. This morning you're headed toward a lesser-known section of the old rice system, not the grand reservoirs or dramatic canals, but a patchwork of fringe paddies and forgotten corners where the Khmer grew more than just rice. Welcome to the other half of dinner. Here's your historical fact. Khmer farmers cultivated a range of secondary crops alongside and between their rice paddies, everything from lotus roots and taro to water spinach, finger millet, and sesame. These weren't side gigs. These were calculated systems of intercropping where timing, root depth, and water needs were considered with eerie precision. You step off the main path and wade into a shallow, slightly overgrown field where rows of lotus plants sway gently above the water. Their broad, plate-sized leaves collect droplets like tiny ponds, and their long stalks shiver when touched by wind. Beneath the surface, thick tubers grow in tangled knots, delicate in flavor, but robust in function. Lotus root soup, lotus tea, lotus everywhere. Fringe tidbit. Lotus wasn't just food, it was also medicine, ink, dye, even a component in cosmetics and offerings. And since its seed pods look like little alien showerheads, they doubled as child-sized musical instruments. If you've never heard a 7-year-old toot on a dried lotus pod, you haven't truly lived. You pass a woman collecting morning glory, also known as water spinach, gathering it in bunches and tying it with a palm fiber ribbon. She smiles and hands you a bundle. You sniff it. Fresh green and vaguely peppery. Breakfast, maybe. As you walk, you begin to notice the subtle layering of crops taro at the field's edge, its large leaves drooping with sleepy grace. Sesame bushes a bit farther uphill growing in the drier plots where they won't drown if the canals oversleep. Each species staked its claim in the Khmer ecosystem, not by chance, but by invitation. The term for this, if you're feeling academic, is integrated wetland farming. But out here, it's just Tuesday. You arrive next at a small tool shed, well, not a shed exactly. More of a communal lean-to, with baskets, hand plows, curved sickles, and bundles of twine hanging neatly from hooks made of forked branches. It smells of rope and dried chilies. A cat sleeps on a sack of grain, purring softly. It does not wake. You pick up a tool and turn it in your hand. A rice sickle curved like the crescent moon, wrapped in rattan for grip. Its blade is short but wickedly efficient. These weren't weapons. These were the surgical instruments of harvest. Historians still debate whether Khmer farmers shared tools communally or owned them individually. Inscriptions mention donations of implements for the rice, but they don't clarify ownership. Were tools lent like library books, passed down like heirlooms, or borrowed with a nod and a promise? The answer, as always, is muddy. You set the sickle down and wander toward a low ridge where sesame stalks stand dry and brittle, their pods curled open like tiny mouths. The harvest here is done. Just the scent of sun-warmed seeds lingers, nutty, earthy, somehow calming. And here's your fringe detail. Sesame oil was sometimes used to light temple lamps, mixed with powdered herbs to make the flame burn steady during ceremonies. If the oil sputtered, it was seen as a bad omen, or maybe just a reminder to harvest better next year. As you descend from the sesame plot, a narrow canal cuts through the fields at an angle that doesn't make immediate sense. You follow it, curious. It winds toward a shaded patch of trees, and there, nestled among the roots, is a small basin fed by a slow trickle. The water smells faintly metallic. Nearby, bundles of fermented rice straw are soaking, an old technique for softening plant fibers used in basket weaving or to enrich compost. Nothing wasted. Everything reused. Even the leftovers from the leftovers. You sit for a moment on a mossy stone. The sun has climbed now, warming your shoulders and stirring the dragonflies back into flight. A boy passes with a yoke across his back, 2 baskets of finger millet bobbing with each step. He grins. You grin back. This isn't the grand story of empires and temples. It's the quiet subplot, what people grew when no one was looking. How they fed themselves between harvests. How they managed not just to survive, but to live in rhythm with a land that gave and asked in equal measure. You stand brushing dirt from your hands. The cat is still asleep. The lotus leaves still tremble. The millet sways. Even the forgotten fields are breathing. You retrace your steps toward the edge of the small field, where the rows of taro and sesame slowly give way to dry mounds and grassy footpaths. And for the first time today, you encounter something the Khmer left behind that wasn't entirely functional. A story carved in stone, half hidden under vines and moss. At first it looks like any other piece of collapsed temple debris, just another worn sandstone block among thousands. But then, the light hits it just right, and you catch the faint outline of a carving, a pair of dancers mid-step, surrounded not by gods or battles, but by swirling waves, frogs, rice stalks, and fish with mischievous smiles. You found the footnote of a forgotten story. Here's your historical fact. While the grand walls of Angkor Wat and Bayon Temple display celestial battles and royal ceremonies, many smaller shrines and outposts across the empire feature more earthbound carvings, scenes of daily life, agricultural work, and water management. These bas-reliefs offer insight not just into what the Khmer built, but what they valued. You kneel beside the stone and trace the groove of a tiny frog caught mid-leap. He's perched near a stylized swirl, likely representing a stream or canal. Above him, a woman appears to be scattering something into the water. Rice seeds, a blessing, fringe tidbit. Some of these carvings are believed to be mnemonic devices. Stone, how-to guides for younger generations. Instead of a scroll or instruction manual, you got a picture. Here's how we flood the paddy. Here's how we charm the rain. Here's what never to do with a sickle on a Tuesday. You rise and notice a few more stones scattered along the slope. One depicts a fish disproportionately large, wearing what might be a crown. Another shows a line of children carrying baskets, their expressions exaggerated into comical grimaces. You get the sense someone had fun carving this. A sculptor with a wink. You follow the trail of scattered carvings until they vanish under the jungle again, lost beneath vines and time. Most temple reliefs were meant to impress. These feel like memories, jokes, advice passed on in stone because parchment fades and kids never listen the first time. Historians still debate whether these low scenes were officially commissioned, or the work of temple artists passing time during repairs or droughts. Some believe they were informal additions, folk graffiti with a chisel. Others insist they served ritual purposes, part of temple education for apprentice farmers and acolytes. You leave the reliefs behind and walk toward the outskirts of an old enclosure. A stone embankment, rectangular and sunken, marks the boundary of what might once have been a ceremonial pool. It's mostly dry now, overgrown with grasses and stray banana trees, but the shape remains. Here's a little-known fact: ceremonial pools weren't always about religion. Some were used to simulate rainfall patterns, filled during monsoon season, then drained slowly to monitor how water might move through a new terrace or canal system. Part ritual, part beta test. You walk the pool's edge and imagine a king or priest standing here barefoot, listening to the mud. Was it sticky enough? Did the slope hold? Did the offering take? Farther along, an overturned clay jar lies half buried in the dirt. You pick it up gently. It's light-weathered, chipped but intact. Maybe it once held seeds, or fish, or someone's lunch, or nothing at all. Whatever it was, it mattered enough to carry. And here's your fringe moment of the day. In some Khmer villages, it was considered bad luck to throw away a jar that had ever held sacred rice. Instead, the jar would be gently buried or placed in a shrine retired with respect. Even empty, it was still a vessel, still worthy. You set it back where you found it nestled in grass and keep moving. The trees begin to close in again. Tall sugar palms and broad-leaved trees with roots like ropes. A shaded path leads away from the pool, and you follow it without thinking, letting your feet decide. Before long, you hear the familiar glug 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 of a narrow channel still flowing, still serving. You lean down and splash a bit of it onto your neck. The water is cooler now, as if it's traveled far and lost some of its heat in the shade. It smells faintly of silt and something floral. You sit beside the channel, your back against a gnarled tree trunk, and close your eyes. This empire, you realize, was held together not by armies or walls, or even temples, but by habits, by carvings in stone, by jars left under banana trees, by frogs and flutes in the exact right amount of mud. It wasn't all grand design. Much of it was memory, the kind that stays wet even when the water leaves. You rise from the shaded bank of the channel, brushing dust and leaves from your hands, and continue deeper into the tangled fringe where water and land blur into a wild, half-forgotten borderland. The air is thick here, humid with the breath of plants and the buzz of insects. You notice the soft crunch of wet leaves underfoot, and the occasional splash of something small slipping away. This is where the rice fields meet the jungle's edge, a delicate threshold where two worlds coexist in uneasy harmony. Here, the Khmer engineers had to balance more than water and soil. They had to manage creatures, some helpful, some less so. Your historical fact for this stretch: the Khmer relied heavily on biological pest control within their rice fields. Rather than poison, they encouraged populations of frogs, bats, dragonflies, and certain fish species to keep insect numbers in check. The rice paddies were designed as ecosystems carefully balanced to support natural predators. You spot a cluster of frogs nestled in a shaded puddle, their throats puffing in slow rhythm. The croaking is both music and machinery, part of a biological feedback loop that protected crops by keeping pests in line. Fringe tidbit: some villages held nightly frog choruses as communal events, believing the louder and more coordinated the croaking, the better the harvest. Think of it as ancient karaoke for agriculture with fewer microphones and more mud. Nearby, a fisherman uses a small bamboo trap, patiently waiting for fish drawn by the aquatic insects stirred up in the fields. The catch won't be large, but every bite counts. Fish also helped aerate the water and control weeds, a natural workforce that Khmer farmers prized. You tread carefully through the wet grass, mindful of the occasional snake or crab burrow. The land feels alive, buzzing not just with insects, but with stories, tales of seasons' floods, and the steady pulse of harvests past. A sharp call breaks through a hornbill, or perhaps a hawk, and you look up just in time to see a great winged shadow slip between the palms. It reminds you of the empire's vastness, the deep jungles beyond the fields, and the silent watch of creatures both mundane and mythic. You follow a narrow canal lined with tall reeds, their tips swaying as if nodding in greeting. The water here is slow and dark, reflecting the canopy above in patches of green and sky. You notice small bubbles rising intermittently, signs of decomposing plant matter, of life cycling unseen beneath the surface. This wetland edge was essential to the Khmer irrigation system. It acted as a natural filter, absorbing excess nutrients, trapping sediments, and maintaining water quality. The engineers understood that clean water was as vital as water itself. Historians still debate how much of this was intentional design versus natural advantage. Did the Khmer deliberately preserve wetlands as biofilters? Or did they simply settle where nature was already doing half the work? Perhaps again, the answer lies somewhere in the muddied middle. You stop beside a small shrine hidden in the reeds, a stone figure draped with faded yellow cloth and fresh flowers. It looks out over the fields like a guardian, silent and patient. A faded inscription at its base marks it as a protector of water spirits, Tuk, the ancient sentinels of canals and reservoirs. You sit beside the shrine, breathing in the scent of wet earth and lotus blossoms. The chorus of frogs swells again, and the stars begin to wink into existence overhead. The land's breath has slowed, now settling into night's quiet rhythm, and you too find yourself breathing with it. The night air is thick with humidity, and the chorus of frogs pulses like a gentle heartbeat, soothing and relentless. You wander along a narrow embankment, the mud soft beneath your feet, the water on either side shimmering with reflected starlight. The world feels suspended between sleep and waking, between earth and water. You come upon a small cluster of wooden huts, their stilts rising just above the waterline, woven palm fronds, shielding them from rain and sun. Smoke curls lazily from a low fire, carrying the scent of cooked rice and grilled fish. Voices rise softly in conversation, laughter, the clink of ceramic cups. Here's your historical fact: Khmer villages were tightly integrated with their irrigation systems. The water didn't just nurture the fields, it shaped daily life. Canal banks were walkways, embankments doubled as community spaces, and the rhythms of water release dictated work, rest, and celebration. You notice a group gathered around a low table, plates of steamed rice, grilled river fish, and spicy herbs laid out like a feast. A man offers you a cup of palm wine, its sweetness tempered by the heat of ginger. You sip slowly, savoring the warmth spreading through you. Fringe tidbit. Some Khmer villages practiced water festivals tied closely to the irrigation calendar. When sluice gates were opened after the dry season, ceremonies involving music, dance, and offerings to the river spirits marked the occasion. It was a time of joy and gratitude, and sometimes a little drunken revelry. You sit with the villagers as the night deepens, listening to their stories, tales of floods that nearly drowned the fields, of bumper harvests, of canal keepers who wielded quiet authority. Their voices carry the history of the land in ways stone carvings cannot. Later, you wander back into the darkness, the distant glow of torches guiding your path along the water's edge. The fields around you ripple softly in the night breeze, their breath slow and steady. Historians still debate whether the collapse of the Khmer irrigation system was due primarily to environmental factors or social upheaval. Some argue that prolonged droughts and floods stressed the system beyond repair. Others point to political fragmentation and declining labor organization. Perhaps it was both a slow unraveling, a breath that faltered. You stop and listen to the water lapping gently at the banks, the rustle of leaves, the distant croak of frogs. The land waits. You wait. And the cycle continues. Dawn creeps over the horizon, turning the sky into a pale wash of pink and gold. You find yourself walking along a narrow earthen dike that snakes between two vast rice paddies, each reflecting the awakening sky like giant mirrors. The world feels still but charged, ready for the day's slow, deliberate dance. You pause to watch a group of workers guiding a team of elephants through the flooded fields. These gentle giants trudge steadily, their broad feet stirring the mud and water into thick swirls. Their trunks lift to sniff the air, flicking away flies with practiced ease. Here's your historical fact. Elephants were essential laborers in the Khmer agricultural system. Beyond their famed role in warfare and temple construction, they were invaluable for plowing and preparing rice paddies, especially in the heavier waterlogged soils where oxen struggled. Their sheer weight and strength helped compact the earth, creating the perfect conditions for rice cultivation. Fringe tidbit. Some Khmer communities believed elephants carried the blessings of the water gods themselves. During planting seasons, special rituals were performed to honor these beasts, including floral garlands draped over their massive necks and offerings of sticky rice cakes. You continue alongside the elephants, the rhythmic squelch of their footsteps blending with the soft murmur of nearby canals. A young mahout guides the lead elephant with gentle commands, his voice low and steady. The bond between them is unmistakable, a language beyond words. As the sun rises higher, workers begin planting rice seedlings in neat rows, their movements synchronized, like a slow collective breath. The fields ripple with life, the water shimmering with tiny fish darting among the plants. Historians still debate the extent to which the Khmer developed formal labor hierarchies around their agricultural work. Some suggest a system of communal work parties, while others argue for a more centralized labor draft tied to royal decrees. You watch as a group of women pause to share a quiet conversation, their laughter ringing soft and clear in the morning air. Nearby, a man adjusts the angle of a sluice gate, allowing water to flow gently into a new section of paddies. The cycle of water and work continues timeless and unbroken. You breathe in deeply, feeling the pulse of the land beneath your feet and the warmth of the sun on your skin. Here in this moment, the Khmer Empire lives on, not in stone, but in rhythm. The day unfolds slowly like thick honey dripping over polished stone. You follow a dusty path that winds away from the bustling paddies toward a quieter corner of the irrigation network, an area where canals narrow and dip, creating a labyrinth of waterways that seem more maze than machine. Here, the water moves with a softer, slower cadence, pooling in shaded hollows and edging around clumps of tall grass. The air is cooler, scented faintly with earth and lotus. You notice a small group of people gathered near an ancient stone structure, a low rectangular basin carved into the earth, its edges worn smooth by centuries of use. A handful of monks sit nearby, their orange robes bright against the muted tones of the landscape. Here's your historical fact. Some Khmer irrigation features doubled as ceremonial or religious sites. Reservoirs and ponds were often consecrated with offerings and prayers believed to house spirits who governed water's flow and fertility. Fringe tidbit. In certain villages, it was customary to release captive fish into these reservoirs as part of rituals to honor water deities, symbolizing abundance and renewal. These fish then became integral to the ecosystem, helping to maintain balance. You watch as a monk lifts a small bowl of water, sprinkling it gently over the stone basin, while chanting softly. The sound is melodic, echoing faintly across the still water. As you approach a village, elder notices you and offers a warm smile, beckoning you to join. You sit quietly as stories are shared, tales of droughts, weathered floods tamed, and the delicate dance of cooperation between man, beast, and water. The elder points to the stone basin and explains through gestures and broken Khmer that the basin represents the heart of the system, the source of life for the surrounding fields. You touch the cool stone and feel a pulse beneath your fingers, as if the land itself is breathing. Historians still debate how deeply intertwined Khmer hydraulic engineering was with their spiritual beliefs. Did technical mastery drive religious practice, or did faith inspire engineering innovation? Perhaps it was a seamless blend, each feeding the other. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the water. The monks rise, gathering their robes as villagers prepare to return home. You rise too, feeling the weight of centuries in the soft mud beneath your feet. The irrigation network is more than stone and earth, it's a living testament to harmony between people and nature. A breath shared across time. You leave the sacred basin behind and venture further into the maze of canals, the water's surface now dappled with shadows from overhanging trees and swaying palms. The air hums softly with the buzz of insects settling in for the evening, and somewhere nearby the unmistakable sound of bamboo clacking against stone echoes faintly. Curious, you follow the sound to find a group of villagers gathered near a low stone platform, where a man expertly strikes a series of bamboo tubes arranged like a xylophone. The music is gentle but rhythmic, carrying across the water with a soothing cadence. Here's your historical fact. Music played an important role in Khmer culture, not just in temples and courts, but also in daily agricultural life. Farmers used songs and instrumental rhythms to coordinate labor, encourage good spirits, and mark the passing of seasons. Instruments like the Ronayat bamboo xylophone are deeply embedded in this tradition. Fringe tidbit. It's said some water gatekeepers used rhythmic calls or songs to signal changes in water flow, coordinating complex irrigation schedules across villages. Think of it as a pre-radio communication system with a distinctly melodic twist. You watch as children clap along their feet splashing lightly in the shallows, while elders share stories beside flickering oil lamps. The music weaves through the night air, blending with the natural symphony of frogs, cicadas, and rustling leaves. You sit quietly, feeling the pulse of community, the human current flowing alongside the steady breath of water. Historians debate the extent to which music influenced Khmer agricultural productivity versus its purely cultural role. Did a well-timed song genuinely affect harvest yields, or was it more about morale and shared identity? Perhaps both. As the night deepens, lanterns are lit along the canal banks, casting warm glows on rippling water. The rhythm slows, the stories grow softer, and the breath of the land settles into a gentle lullaby. You rise ready to continue your journey, carrying with you the melodies of a people who lived in tune with the water's song. The path ahead winds between lantern-lit houses and the faint glow of cooking fires, their smoke curling lazily into the dusk. You wander deeper into the network of irrigation ditches and embankments, where the engineered world and the wild tangle of nature seem to meet and shake hands. Here the lines blur a borderland of muddy feet and uncertain stories. You pause at the edge of a larger canal where a group of villagers sits perched on a wooden bridge, their legs swinging idly above the water. One man, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, is holding court, telling tales as old as the river. Tonight's historical fact: the Khmer hydraulic system was not static. It evolved through centuries of experimentation and adaptation, with old canals being filled, new ones dug, and water routes rerouted according to seasonal patterns, labor shifts, or even royal whims. This flexibility allowed the empire to thrive for centuries, but it also led to endless debates over who deserved credit for innovation. Fringe tidbit: in some villages, oral traditions claim that a lost engineer, sometimes a king, sometimes a wandering monk, sometimes even a clever farmer, first taught the people how to make the fields breathe. The identity changes with the teller, but the story always ends with the same message: wisdom belongs to everyone, and no one holds the final blueprint. You lean in, listening, as the elder spins his version of the tale. Maybe it was King Indra Varman who mapped the first Grand Canal. Maybe it was old Grandma Sao with her instinct for slopes and rain. Historians still argue whether the genius of the Khmer irrigation system came from top-down royal directives or a long lineage of grassroots tinkering. Every inscription found sparks a new round of scholarly bickering, sometimes polite, sometimes less so. A child asks who built the biggest beret, and the elder just winks and says, "We all did in the end." You smile, recognizing that truth. Big achievements are made of many small hands. Another villager chimes in, describing how in tough years when the rains faltered or the floods lingered, whole communities would gather to debate, repair, and revise the waterways. Sometimes it worked, sometimes not, but the effort itself was a kind of wisdom, always questioning, always learning. You sit quietly on the edge of the bridge, feeling the wooden planks warm beneath you, the soft hush of water below, and the gentle murmur of voices all around. The canal flows on, carrying away words and worries alike. And in the distance, another lantern is lit, another song rises, and the night draws close, holding you in the comfort of unanswerable questions and ever-changing stories. The hours slip by as the night deepens, and you sense a subtle shift in the world around you. The canals, once busy with talk and laughter, now lie mostly silent, their surfaces reflecting only the stars and the drifting trails of lantern light. There's a hush, a waiting, as if the whole landscape is holding its breath. You rise from the wooden bridge, crossing back toward the main waterway. Something feels different here. The air is cooler, the fields strangely still. It's as if the irrigation system itself is pausing, resting after centuries of work. Here's your historical fact. For all its brilliance, the Khmer irrigation network was vulnerable to change. when canals silted up or floodgates clogged entire tracts of farmland, could dry out or drown overnight. There are ancient records, sometimes just a line or two carved in stone, of catastrophic crop failures, sudden famine, and desperate repairs. You follow the path along a major canal, noticing how in places the banks are eroded and the water level is low. A lone buffalo stands in the shadows, tail flicking at invisible flies, and a pair of egrets stalk through the mud, searching for leftovers. Fringe tidbit. In times of trouble, villages would sometimes perform elaborate rituals at clogged canals, processions with drums, incense, and offerings of sticky rice or betel nut, all meant to wake up the water and coax it back into flow. If the canal cleared afterward, the celebration was as raucous as a New Year's festival. If it didn't, there was always next season. Historians still argue whether these periodic silences, the breakdowns in the system, were warning signs of the empire's eventual decline, or simply natural bumps in a cycle that was always more fragile than it seemed. Some blame ecological missteps, others political chaos. The truth is probably tangled in both mud and memory. You crouch beside a blocked culvert, running your hand through the cool water, feeling the soft drag of silt and the stubborn grip of weeds. Someone once built this by hand, brick by brick, stone by stone. Someone else came along year after year to dig it out, patch the leaks, and whisper a prayer to the spirits. Tonight the water moves only sluggishly. The breath of the fields is caught, a faint, uneasy silence. You stand and watch as mist gathers over the paddies, blurring the line between land and sky. In the distance, a faint glow marks the nearest village, and somewhere a dog barks, a reminder that life, stubborn and soft, continues, even when the system falters. You turn back toward the heart of Angkor, walking slow, listening to the hush. Every civilization has its moments of pause when the breath catches and the future hangs uncertain. But dawn always comes, and with it a chance to clear the channels, to breathe again. Dawn returns, pale and tentative, washing the land with its first gentle brushstrokes of pink and gold. You move slowly through the mist, following the winding track of an old canal that once guided water with such confident purpose. The jungle presses close now, thicker, wilder, its roots creeping over embankments and pulling stones apart, one patient inch at a time. This is the margin where the city's long memory meets nature's endless appetite for reclamation. The silence is deeper here, punctuated by birdsong and the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. The scent is green ferns, moss, and the slow rot of fallen leaves. Tonight's historical fact: as the Khmer Empire declined, so too did its great waterworks. Abandonment, political strife, changing climate, and shifting river courses all played their part. Canals silted in dikes, collapsed reservoirs dried or turned to marsh. Over decades and centuries, the jungle returned, softening the sharp lines of engineering, until only hints remained: a hump in the earth here, a straight stretch of water there. You pass a toppled stone guardian, half swallowed by vines, its once proud face now wearing a leafy mask. Farther along, a section of ancient dike has collapsed entirely, the gap now spanned by a wild fig tree whose roots drink from what remains of the waterway. Fringe tidbit. There are places in Angkor's old network where the canals, though no longer maintained, still fill with rainwater each year. In these wild stretches, new ecosystems have emerged, home to birds, monkeys, and even the occasional crocodile. Nature doesn't erase, it adapts. You pause at the edge of a sunken field. Here, where rice once grew in neat lines, reeds and wild lotus choke the water's surface. Dragonflies dart and hover. You kneel, brush aside the grass, and see the faint line of laterite blocks under the soil, the bones of the old world quietly supporting the new. Historians still argue whether Angkor's collapse was sudden or slow, violent or quiet. Archaeological evidence points to a gradual process, a long, uneven fading rather than a single dramatic end. Maybe that's how most empires go, not with a shout, but with a breath drawn out and released softer and softer, until only memory remains. You stand and wander through a tangle of lianas that hang like ropes from the trees above. Light filters through in narrow bands, catching the mist in golden halos. The jungle is thickest here, and every step you take is met with the resistance of centuries' roots, vines, stubborn earth. Then suddenly you come to a clearing. Sunlight floods the space, and in the middle is a wide, shallow pool. Birds gather at its edge, dipping and fluttering. The air is alive with movement, the water ringed with lotus blossoms. You realize you are standing in what was once a grand reservoir, a beret now disguised as a jungle pond. The old embankments are just visible under moss and low shrubs, hinting at the scale of what was built and what was lost. You sit on the damp grass and watch as a kingfisher dives and emerges, a flash of blue against green. The land has changed, but it breathes still. The system is gone, yet the memory of movement of water guided and welcomed remains. It is peaceful here at the edge of memory. The fields have gone quiet. The jungle has pressed undo. And what endures is not the empire, but the gentle, unhurried breath of the earth reclaiming its own. You take it all in, the sights, the sounds, the soft pulse beneath the surface, and let yourself fade into the calm. You sit in the heart of the reclaimed reservoir. The soft ground cool beneath you, morning sunlight glinting on the water, and the tips of wild reeds. The last wisps of mist curl away as the day gathers itself, and everything feels both old and startlingly new. The empire is gone, but this land still hums with quiet purpose. You trace the edge of the pool, fingers brushing through dew-wet grass and catching on smooth ancient stone. For a moment, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the shouts of workers hauling earth, the slow creak of an ox cart, the splash of water released into the waiting paddies. All faded now, yet somehow present in the hush. This is the last secret of the Khmer rice fields. They do not truly end. Even after centuries of abandonment, even as nature reclaims every corner, the old lines and channels linger. During the rains, water remembers the ancient paths, pooling where berets once glistened, and trickling through ditches shaped by hands long gone. Crops have changed. The jungle has returned. But the breath of the fields endures. Here's your final historical fact. In present-day Cambodia, many rice farmers still use parts of the ancient network, restoring a canal here, replanting where the land rises just right, borrowing the wisdom of ancestors who read rain and earth as well as any scripture. The system breathes on, transformed, but not lost. Fringe tidbit. In some villages, the start of the rice season is still marked by a ceremony in honor of the old engineers. No names, just a sense that someone once understood how to ask the land to yield and to rest. You stand dusting the soil from your palms and watch as villagers emerge along a narrow causeway. They carry bundles of rice seedlings, their voices gentle in the morning air. The work begins anew as it has for 1,000 years. The ancient patterns remain not just in stone, but in custom, in muscle memory, in the patience of hands that coax the fields back to life season after season. Historians continue to debate, was it kings, monks, or everyday farmers who made these systems possible? Maybe all of them. Maybe in the end it's not about who built what, but about the harmony that emerges when people and land breathe together. You walk slowly, following the gentle slope where a forgotten canal still trickles beneath tangled roots. The new rice fields shimmer, stitched to the memory of what was. And the land, calm, generous, forgiving, breathes quietly, as if inviting you to join. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and scents of the earth carry you. You listen for the soft exhale of water moving unseen, for the distant song of frogs, for the rustle of new growth in ancient soil. You are part of this cycle now, walking where others walked, remembering what must not be forgotten, breathing with the fields.